Today is the annual or biannual conference on insurance fraud and auto theft. So the topics that we cover include all types of insurance fraud in addition to auto theft. This is the fourth conference we're put on. It's done every 2 years. Insurance fraud across the country is actually a large issue, and it is an issue that we see in Louisiana. So hopefully this will engage more people in the process of fighting insurance fraud. Our audience for the conference tends to be insurance agents and adjusters, so in addition to the SIU fraud investigators. So hopefully this will get everyone engaged, from the agent or the adjuster all the way up through the SIU investigator, engaged in the fraud process.
As it relates to flood, you have people coming in from out of state to do contractor fraud. You have people coming in on the adjuster side who are not doing things the proper way. I mean, it happens in every single disaster. It happened in Katrina, it happened in Rita, it happened in Superstorm Sandy. So it's not unprecedented, but you're going to see a different type of people coming here. They're going to prey on the elderly. They're going to try to sell them a bill of goods. They're going to come in and want to repair their homes, and they haven't asked for it. You're going to have people on the other side who are homeowners who are trying to pad their bills to get things that they need or they think they need. That they had the 32-inch, but miraculously it turned into an 80-inch television when they send the thing to the insurance company. So, you're going to see a list of very bad things that happen around fraud. Now, is it going to be a whole heck of a lot? Maybe 2 to 4%, but you're still going to get a lot of it out there.
Some of the disaster fraud that we're seeing now are auto claims dealing with flooding. We have a lot of policies that are being bought after the fact, after a car's flooded, being moved to a flooded area, and then buy the policy and make the claim following. We'll also probably see a lot of issues with public adjusters, contractor fraud, things of that nature, with exaggerated claims related to homeowners' policies.
Right now you hear a lot about people having claims adjusters who may come in and you see fraud there, or contractor fraud is really prominent this time of year, or even people filing fraudulent claims. One of the things I've heard the commissioner mention is somebody may have, let's say, a 19-inch TV, and when they report it on their insurance, they report it as having like a 36-inch TV.
Disaster fraud is big, from tornadoes to hailstorms to flooding. Every time something like this happens, you have all the different types of fraud, from buying policies after the fact, or people see that a storm's coming down and they're upended on a car or a vehicle. They'll bring it down just to get it in the storm's path. That's another big thing that happens. And then on the flip side, on the backside, after the storms, you have unscrupulous contractors in areas that will come in and take advantage of people, where they're taking deposits or they'll do substandard work, things such as that.
We can expect inflated claims, damage to vehicles or something that didn't actually happen. Somebody, trying to claim that, or extra damage to a home or something like that. That's generally what we'll see.
What are the penalties if someone is caught committing disaster fraud?
It could be some heavy prison time, depending on how much it's involved in this. It starts at a year, and then we have heavy penalties.
Well, it's something at the East Baton Rouge District Attorney's Office we take very seriously. Since the recent floods, we haven't seen a whole lot of it yet, but we expect it to come in when the insurance checks start arriving, and it can be very serious. You've got people who have already been victimized once by Mother Nature, and now we've got people coming in and trying to finish the job.
It is a widespread problem nationwide. We're one of the few states that has a state police agency that investigates this type of crime. It is widespread in Louisiana. We try to keep much control over it as we can through investigation and prosecution. We have a specialized unit with 30 commissioned individuals based on regional concept. We have units up north, units out west, units south in Louisiana.
One of the key components that allows fraud to happen is opportunity. And following a disaster, we see enormous opportunity for people to commit fraud.
Insurance fraud itself carries 5 years. If you charge it as theft, it's a graduated crime. The more you steal, the more time you could potentially get. Theft over $25,000, for example, which would not be unheard of in a contractor situation, could carry up to 20 years in jail.
Insurance fraud is unfortunately very common across the United States. Property and casualty fraud alone is upwards over $30 billion a year, just property and casualty. Greatly, there's probably 10 to 15% of our premiums are due just to this, and so it's a big problem all across the whole United States.
We've seen fraud from all sorts of disasters. Here in Louisiana, obviously, we've had our share, most recently from the flood, hurricanes. I see it on the level within administrations, from contractors, and from applicants themselves. And I think a lot of the obvious things that we see that deal with contractor fraud, where we can find for bogus or duplicate billings. We find things within administrations when it comes to procurement issues. Those sort of things are reported on and a lot of times investigated on a criminal level, but I think more of a issue that's a little more widespread that goes a little more unnoticed is what happens down at the bottom when it comes to the applicant level. And I think a lot of it comes to the fact that the lines get skewed a little bit because we all feel entitled to be made whole, but there's a lot of strict rules that come along with government aid in particular when it comes to a disaster. Fraud, the word, to me, fraud is just an ugly word. In fact, in the claims world, I remember referring to it as the F word. Because we always wanted to be cautious of labeling an insured, claimant, or situation with such an ugly word and allegation, unless it had been proven. The word represents wrongful, illicit greed, but it costs us all. It's at the expense of all of us. Globally, trillions are lost to fraud each year. Its perpetrators, as I see it, fall on a spectrum. You have con artists on one hand that don't need to justify their actions because they don't mind stealing. They don't mind deceiving other people. Then you have those that aren't criminals, but one day, in the midst of an opportunity, they're able to justify a need, or they're able to justify an entitlement that they feel. Something like, my neighbor got more money than me, or and didn't have as much damage, or I've been paying premiums for all these years and never made a claim. One common element across the types of fraud that occur and the people who commit them is opportunity. And disasters create big opportunity. And we've seen that more than enough here in Louisiana. The average number of annual billion-dollar disaster events just continues to rise. No more than 2 billion-dollar inland flood events occurred in a single year between 1980 and 2015. But as of last month, according to NOAA, we've already had 4 in 2016. I'm sure this may have been said today already, but Louisiana is no stranger when it comes to large disasters and the fraud that accompanies them. Hurricane Katrina, the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, they're the 2 top disasters in U.S. history for fraud claims. And as of last week, the National Center for Disaster Fraud has already received over 1,200 fraud complaints since the August flood, and they're expecting thousands more. Following disasters, there's an enormous influx of capital to the affected communities from the government and from private insurance. From an administrative standpoint, with this funding, the insurance industry is far superior in its ability to indemnify losses, to assist its affected customers quickly and effectively. They know who they're paying, they know what they're paying for, and have pre-existing procedures and trained staff to implement the process. They're working off of an existing database of information about the risk that they insured and the people who own that risk. The government, on the other hand, has to determine who and what was affected and is eligible for assistance What means of recovery are they eligible for? And on top of that, federal standards for recovery must be adopted and adapted by local and state agencies to determine the how, who, and what is going to receive aid and assistance. Another major difference between insurance and grants when it comes to disasters is that insurance has an obligation to indemnify losses it contractually owes, whereas the government must see the process of funded recovery all the way through. We've got to wait till things are back the way they were, or at least the way that we foresee them to be once recovery is complete. The potential for disaster fraud is so high not only because of the influx of capital, but because of the need to provide relief and assistance as quickly as possible. And it's a very, very challenging balance. A major challenge of government-funded recovery is balancing compliance and the speed of that aid. Compliance is driven by rules and regulations. At the same time, there's humanitarian and political pressure to distribute aid and facilitate recovery as quickly as possible. There's a high need for rapid assistance and recovery services, like utilities, debris removal, rebuilding schools, businesses, and of course housing that's affected. Speed, definitely needed. It boosts the economy, it boosts the morale of those affected, it helps the community in so many ways, but it can also cause substandard quality and controls. Another recipe for fraud. I've been working, as was said, as a consultant to the New York Governor's Office of Storm Recovery for the past few years on the New York Rising Housing Program. It's a state-administered program. It's funded with federal dollars from HUD's Community Development Block Grant Program for disaster recovery. The HUD CDBG DR funds, they've been appropriated by Congress since 1994. There's no annual appropriation. So that's part of the speed issue, is that there's not a plan in place that's ready to go like there is in the insurance industry. It has to be created to an extent and has to be implemented. CDBG DR funds are designed to supplement standard aid from FEMA, from SBA, and the Army Corps of Engineers, and of course, private insurance. Regulations such as the Stafford Act seek to guard against fraud and ineligible uses of taxpayer funding. It's also designed to ensure that federal assistance, and specifically Community Development Block Grant disaster recovery funds, is the last source of recovery funding. It's funding that's made available after all other forms of disaster assistance have been exhausted. As such, ideally, a CDBG DR program could catch duplications and disaster fraud that may have previously occurred with any program applicants. So it's the final stop. From hard fraud to soft fraud, we see everything following a disaster. Again, it's just an enormous opportunity. It's opportunity for those who have been waiting for the opportunity, and it becomes an opportunity for those that weren't looking for one, but slide into a way where they can justify it and have a need to take advantage of. Hard fraud's planned and deliberate and includes schemes of intentional losses and false claims, like creating a loss when no event occurred. With insurance, it's a staged events like burning down a covered building, or filing a false theft claim for stolen jewelry, or staging a car accident, or faking an injury. With disaster aid and assistance, this includes your fake charities, forgery, and pretending to be someone else for financial gain. It involves the con artists. Soft fraud takes advantage of opportunity through exaggeration or padding of a legitimate claim. With insurance, of course, includes exaggerating an injury or claiming something lost was of better quality or newer than it actually was. With disaster aid and assistance, may include applicants claiming damage known to be pre-existing, because again, that property may not have been checked like it would have in the insurance industry before a claim ever occurred. It includes not disclosing previously received benefits that duplicate those they're applying for again. The insurance industry understands the risks involved in moral hazards and morale hazards. but we see these hazards materialize following a major disaster. Moral hazard, the condition of risk, entices someone to intentionally cause a loss and commit fraud. And of course, moral hazard, more about carelessness and indifference for what's right. I see it as disrespect for loss or costs that are covered by insurance. Disrespect for community and those of us that have to ultimately pay for that. It involves one's careless attitude towards risks that are covered by insurance, which would otherwise be prevented, like leaving expensive articles in a parked car, leaving a house for a while with a bunch of candles lit. While the moral hazard of insured losses are minimized by the industry through policy conditions and exclusions, such as excluding damage from neglect, moral hazard comes to life following a disaster due to the opportunity created for fraudsters. Following a disaster, the risk of fraud when it comes to aid from the federal and state government exists internally and externally on all levels. It's committed by applicants, claimants, it's committed by contractors, it's committed by administrators. After Katrina, of course, we saw unoccupied hotel rooms paid for, the phantoms. Millions were spent on unused mobile homes. Rental assistance paid to prisoners, and contractors billing for bogus hours, duplicating bills. Claimants may conceal benefits already received or exaggerate damages. Applying for FEMA rental assistance aid when the home claimed is not a primary residence, for example, such as living elsewhere in an unaffected property when a disaster occurred. I remember there was a guy in New Jersey when Sandy hit who had lived with his girlfriend for months, and his own home was up for rent. It wasn't being rented at the time, but at that time his cost was nothing. I think that he was living with his girlfriend, and he had his primary residence, but he didn't live there, so he was not actually displaced in any kind of way. There's pleading ignorance. Is it fraud or is it stupidity? And sometimes that's challenging. That's kind of that low level, not blatant sort of, fraud that occurs with the phantom hotel rooms or the unused mobile homes. But it's sometimes it gets subjective, and it's about motivation. What's someone trying to get across here? Was it intentional or was it not? And for example, inflated invoices submitted by a contractor for a reimbursement depreciation. Seen plenty of times where by accident, that's where it seems like a lot of times these are caught in the insurance industry, is that by accident there was the fake invoice and there was the real one, and they were stuck together and both got sent in. Something along those lines, where the question is, the contractor, is this their motivation? Is it the insured's motivation? And sometimes it's hard to tell, and sometimes they're in it together, whether it's to attempt to recover depreciation that wasn't incurred or to get out of a deductible. Following a disaster, the risk of fraud when it comes to aid from the federal and state government exists internally and externally again. And cash tips and bribes is another one that does happen to inspectors specifically when they have that face-to-face interaction with an applicant. I recall we had an inspector in New York, and this guy was brand new, and he had gone out for his first day. It was actually training, and one of our trainers went along. They went on an inspection. It was a condo complex, and there was an owner who had 4 units, and they went through inspecting these units. And as I heard it, our new guy who was in training, he was acting kind of funny. He had his hands in his pockets, and he wound up he almost burst into tears when it was all said and done. He was overwhelmed enough as it was by challenges he wasn't anticipating, but the owner of the property that was affected kept trying to stuff cash into his pocket, and he was just trying to block it away. And he was just so overwhelmed by that and wasn't sure what to do about it. So those are challenges, because to what extent, or what are we going to do about that? We have someone that's attempting to commit fraud. We have to bring those up to the right people, but that information has to go somewhere. It has to go into some kind of database if we want to ever prove there's a pattern of something like this in the event that something happens in the future. Maybe this guy does bribe someone in the future, but the claim of having done that is denied, and there's no sort of proof that any activity like that ever occurred. And it's challenging to try and keep up with that. Claiming damage which didn't occur. It happens. Fortunately, saw a lot more of this in New York than I ever would have anticipated, where claiming a home that was flooded that actually didn't. Maybe the surrounding area flooded, neighboring homes flooded, that actual home didn't. And fortunately, we continue to better prepare for these things and prevent fraud like this, using geocoded surveys and using and sharing databases of information where we know what happened where and when. There's contractor fraud. I remember plenty of times in the insurance world, especially for hailstorms, windstorms, there's the manufactured damage that can occur, causing intentional damage to a roof, for example. Within government-aided programs, we see it with, again, inflated billing. We see it with taking advantage of policies that are in place. Government aid is, again, it's a very difficult balance to get it out as quickly as possible and at the same time make sure that it's paid correctly. The faster you get it out, the more fraud and mistakes are going to happen, and the slower you do, the more you hinder the recovery, and you do affect morale of the community. And people don't want to come back if their homes have been devastated. But with these programs, a lot of times in good faith, there are policies that are put in place to allow things to happen in an expeditious way, and with rules that make things fair for people. And sometimes contractors figure out different loopholes or figure out the consistencies in the way things are being done and figure out a way to take advantage of them. It could be from estimating guidelines or taking advantage of different materials that are allowed for, where sometimes if the prices market value may be a little high on what estimated costs are for one thing and a little low on the other, they offset the way that they estimate things into their to their best advantage. Administratively, we see things like vendors using non-public information for personal gain, or fudging timesheets. There was a allegation, at least in New York most recently. There was a website that was put up, and there were some solicitation emails that were being blasted out to applicants within the CDBG program up there. And it was called New York Rising Consultants. And they had a website and logos that looked just like those of the state's logos. Everything looked very legitimate. They explained things in a very technical manner that made sense. It's because these were inside people. These were people that had stolen information that they gained from the program, non-private information, non-public information, and they used it for their own personal gain. There's procurement fraud. There's bid rigging, there's kickbacks, there's conflicts of interest. Conflicts of interest are all over the place. And we try to put as many safeguards and controls into place to prevent them, but they do still happen. When it comes to procurement, the duties should always be segregated. So you don't have the same person that's paying for reviewing work that's also selecting which vendors are used. And the personnel that are involved in the process should be well trained and follow established policies and procedures. And that's a real key to preventing these things from happening, is that the policies and procedures to do so are in place, that all of the administration that are facilitating the recovery and the aid are trained in those policies and that they follow them, because there's safeguards in there to prevent fraud when we do. We saw Ray Nagin post-Katrina, and in fact, I got to relive that memory when I saw him on American Greed the other night. You know, not a real, it's hard to see that, you know. That's, when we see the things that happen right here in our state, in our home, and the black guy that it did for him for some time. The con artists. You know, I see these as the kind of the non-stakeholders, those that aren't directly affected, or those that aren't legitimately part of the recovery process. So they're not receiving aid, they're not administering aid, they're not involved in facilitating any of it whatsoever. They come from the outside. They don't have an interest in what's going on other than their very, very own interest. Includes fake offers of aid, those that troll to steal identity through phone, email, websites, or even in person. There are fake charities, fraudulent contractors, and those posing as volunteers and inspectors. So we see it from those that are sitting halfway across the world. We see it from those that are knocking on doors within the affected community, and they're all over the place. There's some effective measures that have been taken, such as standardizing identification, for example. So at least when there is a recovery program in place, that anyone involved in that who's a contractor or part of the administration all has standardized identification. So at the very least, then you can teach the public and explain to them that this is what you need to look for anytime that you have someone that says they're representing this program come to your home. Insurers or carriers are less likely than the government to attempt to recover overpayment of claims. But overpaid grants, they have to be recovered by the government. In February of 2016, New York State reported that it would begin to recapture $59 million from approximately 1,500 applicants due to issues involving eligibility and duplication of benefits. And to what extent any overpayment involved fraud depends. It goes back to that pleading ignorance. Could be fraud, or it could just be stupid. You know, especially when it comes to things like duplication of benefits. I forgot, because it's so often these programs, there's money that's paid in good faith with the information available at the time, and the new information becomes available later that should have been known at the time that the money was paid. So oftentimes these agents would go back and try to collect it, which is not easy to do, to say the least. It's probably a whole nother talk on how that happens. So once again, the potential for disaster fraud is so high, not only because of the influx of capital, but because of the need to provide relief and assistance as quickly as possible. Fraud is a necessity, I hate to say, but it is necessary if we want to expedite recovery and the distribution of aid. But the right measures must be taken to minimize it. Things that we can do, we've got to have effective quality control through detailed policies and procedures that must be followed and implemented to minimize the risk of fraud after disaster. Data integrity, it's crucial in preventing and detecting fraud. Data must be standardized, it must be in a uniform format that can effectively validate against other systems and ensure accuracy, and to identify potential duplicates. Physical inspections, they should be conducted as often as needed to confirm not only the existence of claimed locations, but also to verify the cause and extent of damage along with the progress of recovery. Fraud detection and monitoring, it's also necessary, but it's also more costly than effective preventative controls. So the preventative controls, they're key and the most efficient and effective means to minimize disaster fraud. The insurance industry does this through information sharing and databases like ISO, and they already have confirmed information on policyholders and the property they insure when an event strikes. Government-funded recovery must verify applicant information in a similar way through other government agencies and through third parties. With disasters on the rise, the opportunity for fraud is just going to rise along with it, but the risk and extent to which it occurs doesn't have to. So with that, let's hope that the estimation that there's going to be thousands more fraud complaints about the August flood, not quite true, but you know, as they are, I think community involvement is definitely a key in that we all share information and that information is reported. It's kind of like we're at a time where it's a big drive out there to get out and vote this coming November. Well, there should be a drive too to report anything that's suspicious. That definitely has to be a major outreach anytime there is a disaster. Thanks.
How tough is it for investigators to detect and arrest people for disaster or insurance fraud?
It's getting easier, it's getting better, and I think a big key in that is shared resources, centralized databases, open communication, standardized data itself, and so I think that continues to get better, but it is certainly difficult, and you know, when it comes to the private sector at all, like insurance, to an extent, they certainly don't want to have customer service issues when it comes to a lot of pushback, I think, when it does come to fraudulent things. So the big things come to the surface, and I think that there's a lot of success there in the investigation and prosecution of those. But I think more driving the message again with the kind of low-level fraud that goes on is key and important to minimizing the costs associated with it.
What advice do you have to homeowners as they begin to rebuild their homes?
The first thing you do is probably check out who you have working on your home. Know who they are, have a contract in place, you know, make sure that they're insured and bonded for the work that they're doing, and make sure they give you an itemized list of the work that they will be doing and keep track of the payments that you make to them.
Make sure you use reputable people. If you're going to use a contractor that's licensed, state licensed and bonded. Make sure you check references. Make sure you know who those people are who are going to be working on your home. If you're going to have an adjuster that comes out, make sure that adjuster works for the insurance company. Or if they work for FEMA, they have to be properly credentialed. Take a picture with them. Take a picture of their vehicle. Make sure you have all the information you need in order to have your home repaired correctly. Check with for the Contractors Board in Louisiana. Every contractor in Louisiana has to be licensed through the Contractors Board. So make sure you do everything that's possible to protect yourself from fraudulent people.
Let's just say on a roofing fraud, you know, or after a hurricane or major storm, these companies, they'll come in from all over the world, all over the country, and they have no licensing. You know, some states don't have licensing requirements for roofers. Let's just say roofing fraud, for example. And so they come in and they'll have a pickup truck, two guys in a pickup truck and some magnetic signs, and to the uninformed public, they'll look like a legitimate company. And they may do work, but they'll come in and take advantage. They may take a deposit. That's one type of fraud we're seeing, is they'll prey upon the senior citizens, and they may take a deposit and then you never see them again. Or they will come in and do work, but it's very substandard, and their work actually will not comply with the warranty requirements for, say, a shingle company. So when they leave the work site, there's really no warranty on the roofing system as it is. So it's a big problem.
How difficult is it to prosecute these type of cases?
Like any other case, it depends on the kind of evidence we get. The better people are at actually documenting what has occurred, what they've been told, keeping their receipts and different things, the kinds of things that would be very helpful to us in prosecuting a case down the line.
If people have questions like more information, what should they do?
Oh, you should definitely go to the department's website. That's www.ldi, as in Louisiana Department of Insurance.gov.